Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we continue our look into 10 things that you might or might not have known about things in Halo. In our previous video, we looked at 10 things you might or might not have known about Spartan-IIIs. Now, before that we did Spartan-II, so it makes sense that we continue in that same vein, and cover today 10 things that you might or might not have known about Spartan-IVs. Let's get into this and roll the intro. Spartan-IVs are closer to the Orion project than any of the other Spartans. Now this is relatively common knowledge. The Spartan-IVs were augmented as fully grown adults. So were the Orion candidates. They were fully grown adults that were given chemical augmentations to make them super soldiers. So the two classes bear a striking resemblance to each other in this regard, but it also goes a little deeper than that. It goes to the nomenclature surrounding the Orions and the Spartans. Now, the very name Spartan comes from ancient Greece. The Spartans of ancient Greece were some of the most elite warriors produced by mankind to that point, and it was owed in no small part by the method in which they went about training their civilian populace to become warriors. Spartan boys were trained from the age of 7 years old in something called a gogi, which is basically military indoctrination and training from 7 years of age all the way through until their adult life, where they would then serve in the Spartan military. Even Spartan girls were trained to fight and defend themselves. Every single civilian of Sparta was a warrior first. This being markedly progressive for the time, given that most other places in the world at that stage saw women as second-class citizens. So the very method by which the Spartans were trained earned them the title of a Spartan. That is mirrored in the Spartan-II and Spartan-III programs respectively, because the candidates for both of those programs were kidnapped, unfortunately, at the age of 6 years old, and then trained through military indoctrination and aggressive training regimes to become the most elite warriors of the 26th century. So those parallels drawn between the ancient Spartans and the Spartan-IIs and IIIs mean that Spartan-IIs and IIIs earned the name of Spartan just as the ancient Spartans earned their name by the method in which they were trained. The Spartan-IVs do not follow this same ethos. And because they don't follow this same ethos, many would consider that they don't necessarily earn the title of Spartan. Some have considered maybe they should be called helots or hoplites or other similar warrior terminology from ancient Greece to pay homage to the earlier programs that laid the foundation for the Spartan-IV program, but also to quite clearly differentiate them from the earlier programs. I'd love to know your opinions on this in the comments below. Now, moving on. Yeah, there are far fewer Spartan-IVs than you might think. Indeed, when you weigh up just how many Spartans have been created over the years, the Spartan-IVs are nowhere close to leading in numbers. The Orion program had around 300 members. The Spartan-IIs originally had room for 300, that was reduced to 150 and then reduced again to 75, mainly due to budget constraints. The Spartan-IIIs saw 3 separate classes, each 300 strong, with a couple of them being more than 300, meaning, ignoring the possibility that Delta Company have since been augmented, there were over 900 Spartan-IIIs. Yet to date, the only guaranteed numbers that we have in regards to the Spartan-IVs is that the first class consisted of 145 members, and the second class consisted of a little bit more than 145 members. In fact, there's a general estimation that there's between 300 and 500 Spartan-IVs. Now, obviously, there's a distinct possibility that other classes have since come online, or much more than 145 were originally augmented in the second class. So, on the high end, yeah, okay, maybe the Spartan-IVs are the most numerous because at the high end we could possibly see between 1,000 and 1,500, but the official numbers, the actual numbers that we have guaranteed on record, there are between 300 and 500 Spartan-4s. There were already Spartan-4s serving before the fall of Reach or the events of Halo CE. So turn the clock right the way back, all the way back to that first time on the Pillar of Autumn arriving at Halo, and even before then, chronologically speaking, when we were in Noble Team on the planet of Reach during the fall of Reach, there were already Spartan-4s in existence at that time. In fact, there were already Spartan-4s in existence as early as 2548, 4 years before the end of the Human Covenant War and the era to which we most commonly attribute to being the era of the Spartan-4s. Which kinda means that in this footage that was given for Halo Infinite's multiplayer showing Spartan Agreena's kind of movement into the Spartan program, the Spartans that landed on Earth, this is London after all, they may well have been Spartan-4s. It was during this time that it was widely classed as the experimental phase of the Spartan-4s. So while the first actual class of Spartan-4s weren't augmented and weren't active until January 7th of 2553, there is very clear evidence of active Spartan-4 operators much earlier than this. Leading on from that, the very first Spartan-4s that were augmented were done so to save their lives. Victor Gallardo, Dorian Guin, Evelyn Russo, and Saskia Nazari were all exposed to Forerunner artifacts which caused strange genetic anomalies which caused wounds that they received to not heal, obviously causing continued blood loss, severe risk of infection, sepsis, septicemia and septic shock. During their exposure to these Forerunner artifacts, they were also accompanied by Spartan Owen B096, whose genetic augmentations effectively made him immune to these effects. All 4 of these individuals, who were actually high school students at the time, desperately needed these augmentations to save their lives. Victor in particular was already in a state where he was unconscious, and thus his parents gave consent for him to receive the augmentations to save his life. Victor was the first to undergo the augmentations, and when he came out the other end, his wounds healed and it was proved that the augmentations did indeed make them immune to the effects of the Forerunner artifacts, so the other 3 quickly followed suit. Interestingly enough, it was the Office of Naval Intelligence themselves, Section 3, that offered these augmentations to these individuals to make sure that they survived. Obviously, it benefited their own interests because these augmentations then proved whether or not they could augment close to fully grown adults with these new augmentations, but in so doing, they also saved 4 high school kids' lives, and with it, brought into being the Spartan-IV program. Okay, that previous one was kind of a half-truth. It's majoritively accurate. Well, it is accurate, but there were, technically speaking, Spartan-IV operators before that, but they weren't official in any capacity. Basically, the Office of Naval Intelligence covertly made 10 experimental Spartan-IVs. Unfortunately, all of them died except for 1. The augmentation sets that they performed on these 10 individuals were much more aggressive, with the goal in mind basically to have an augmentation set you could give a human being, a fully grown human being, that would make them a super soldier without the need for armour, Mjolnir being one of the most expensive aspects of the Spartan program. So the plan with these 10 individuals was to augment them to make them basically able to go toe-to-toe with a fully armoured Spartan, but with no need for armour themselves. 9 of the 10 augmented died. The one that survived, Ilza Zane, was driven mad and was kind of factored back into the Office of Naval Intelligence, but very quickly thereafter defected and became the insurrectionist leader of the new colonial alliance. She is widely accepted as being the very first Spartan-IV, but again, due to its unofficial capacity, it can be overlooked. All members of Fireteam Majestic, as we see them in Spartan Ops, are rookie Spartans with the exception of Tedra Grant. This may explain why these Spartans seem a little bit more amateur or unprofessional, because they're basically very newly created Spartans, and they perhaps still have a kind of need or a desire to prove themselves worthy of the title of Spartan, somewhat overcompensating for the fact that they're basically still green and fresh out of boot camp again. Tedra Grant actually predates Fireteam Majestic by quite a margin, and was actually one of the earlier Spartan-IVs augmented, and was even instrumental in testing early testbed prototypes of the Mjolnir Gen 2 platform. Going back to Fireteam Majestic, it was actually the mission in Rio de Janeiro that was mentioned in Spartan Ops, which was Spartan Fireteam Majestic's first mission as a fireteam. So they're still new to each other as well, which again somewhat explains why there's a bit of banter and, kind of a quote-unquote dick-waving competition going on between the members of Fireteam Majestic. All the while, the more professional Tedra Grant just kind of sits back and is mildly bemused by the male Spartans of Majestic kind of, tussling it out and figuring out where they rest in the sociological hierarchy. So yeah, moving on. Spartan-IVs require constant tune-ups of their augmentations to keep them operating efficiently. Now, this is quite different and quite dissimilar from the earlier Spartan programs. The augmentations that the Spartan-IIs and Spartan-IIIs received are pretty stable once they're in place. It's not to say that the Spartans of the 2s and 3s don't periodically receive some degree of tune-up or maybe additional augmentation, as this has been at least hinted towards on several occasions. But most definitely the Spartan-IVs requiring constant tune-ups to keep their augmentations basically operating efficiently and symbiotically within their body suggests that these augmentations are much less stable, or that the Spartan-IVs are just not quite as genetically predisposed or as compatible with this particular class of augmentations. I mean, it's not particularly surprising. The human body is a very complex and interlinked system with a lot of variables and chemicals and hormones that can kind of knock things out of whack, and there's obviously a constant process of cells being born, aging, cell senescence, being destroyed, new bone material, new muscle material, new skin. It's our bodies are in a constant state of flux, so it's not surprising at all that some people would react a little bit more chaotically to augmentation sets than others. But it's just rather interesting that this seems to be a rule for practically all Spartan-IVs. Maybe not all of them to the last individual, but certainly on a wider scale, practically all Spartan-IVs require constant tune-ups. One would assume then, if the Spartan-IVs were not given the right support and right treatments for a prolonged period of time, say they were in very deep cover for example, it's entirely possible their augmentations would weaken dramatically over time. An interesting thought. Spartan-IV augmentation sets are markedly inferior to all other Spartan augmentation sets. It's abundantly clear with the Spartan-II augmentations that they have bone reinforcing augmentations that make their bones nearly indestructible. They have nervous augmentations which give them a 300% boost in their reaction time. They have muscle augmentations which basically enable them to lift 3 times their body weight, and their body weight itself due to this increase is twice that of a normal human as well, basically giving them the equivalent of 6 times the strength of a normal human. Alongside an eye augmentation which gives them enhanced colour vision, enhanced visual acuity in general, and enhanced ability to see in the dark. The Spartan-III augmentation sets give them a chemical cocktail which basically makes their bones indestructible. They receive the same coprotein complex muscle injections as the Spartan-IIs, which means that again they have the same kind of strength increase that the Spartan-IIs have. Their nerve augmentations increase their reaction time by 300%, and they receive augmentations to their vision, which gives them enhanced colour vision, enhanced night vision, and enhanced visual acuity. Practically exactly the same as the Spartan-IIs. The Spartan-IV augmentation sets still increase the strength and power and resistance to break and increase in reaction time of the other augmentations, but there's no metrics on to what degree they do this. The bones are reinforced and lengthened with a titanium fullerene lattice. This would make their bones more resistant to breaking through shearing and through extension, but not necessarily through compression. Their muscles are stretched, grafted, receive a protein complex, and receive some degree of artificial material that allows them to work harder without tearing from the bones, but gives no metric on to what degree this muscle augmentation increases strength. Their nerves are supermyelinated, which suggests that their reaction times increase, but again we get no metric exactly on how much that increase is. Even the eye augmentation is just a corneal implant, and although it says that it improves the subject's eyesight and night vision, it doesn't specify anything beyond that. So with all this taken into consideration, it's abundantly clear that the Spartan-IV augmentations, while compared to human baseline, are significantly powerful. When in comparison to the Spartan-IIs and IIIs, they're very inferior. Spartan-IVs could hypothetically live to be over 450 years old. Now this is based off an extrapolated calculation that I did based off of the end cap augmentation that alters the telomeres, which are structures on the end of the DNA strain of the Spartan-IVs. Each time a cell divides, the telomeres get worn down and don't copy fully, and eventually there's nothing of them left, causing the DNA to either become corrupted or begin breaking down. This is known as the Hayflick limit, and is basically the number of times that a cell can divide until it divides into corruption. This leads to cancers, cell senescence, and if systemic, can happen across the entire body over a long enough time period, basically is what contributes to an organism dying of natural causes. The Spartan-IVs have their telomeres rejuvenated, which, at least based on the UNSC's initial calculations, means that the Spartans' fighting career will exceed a century. That's an exact quote from the official Spartan field manual. In the specific video where I tackled this subject, I argued that the average active duty soldier doesn't tend to be much older than around 40 years of age, generally speaking because the military lifestyle does take its toll on the body. So that can be considered the average baseline for service for an active duty soldier. Obviously after the age of 40, a person could hypothetically live up to be about 100 years old in modern society, and that would most definitely be the case in the 26th century. Then you also have to account for the period of time spent from being born until being eligible to actually sign up to the military, which is between 18 to 20 years. So that means the duration of actual active service is about 20 years, which constitutes 20% of the individual's lifespan. So if Spartan-IV's active service career is expected to exceed a century, those 100 years should only constitute 20% of the individual's lifespan, which theoretically makes it 450 years. Now yes, this is effectively the equivalent of a facsimile, so to speak, of normal human and proportions of timescales to Spartan and proportion of timescales, and in all likelihood Spartans age better, they heal better, they're less prone to long-lasting injuries causing fatigue and degradation of joints and things like that normal soldiers would suffer with. So maybe the 100 years is actually more akin to maybe 40, 50 or even 60% of that Spartan's lifespan, in which case they would live, sort of maybe 200 to 250 years old. But if you literally take the numbers 1 to 1 and just upscale them for Spartan-IV equivalents, yeah, 450 years. Jesus. None of the Spartan augmentations are removable, meaning that when they retire, because assuming the Spartan-IV doesn't die in combat, they will eventually reach retirement. When they retire, they'll be fully augmented superhuman civilians. They'll be war assets, basically human beings that have augmentations that make them a weapon. But they'll just be a guy, a girl. They'll just be people doing people things. Which, I mean, at face value that's cool, but also that would fundamentally change the way that society operates in general. I mean, they'd have assuming they retire and they're still, you know, relatively full of life, you know, and without pain and things like that as a consequence of the war or their active service, that means that they'll be able to go for jobs that require physical effort or speed of reaction and things like that and outperform every other human without even trying. They'd be able to go into, say, strongman competitions and completely and utterly destroy every single record held by a normal human being. We'd have to make entire new categories of competitive sports, of like weightlifting and resistance training, of Olympics. We'd have to find new ways of employing them in regards to how best to use their augmentations, and we'd have to find a way to pay them that would be commensurate to their level of skill, talent and graft they put into the job, but while also simultaneously not taking the piss out of non-augmented human beings. It muddies the water dramatically. And indeed onwards from that, based on observed situations where previously augmented human beings have reproduced, they've passed some degree of superhuman capabilities to their offspring. This has happened. This is on record. Spartan-IVs are just the newest, and by the time it gets down the line a bit, the most numerous generation of Spartans that can and will have lives outside of the military. And that was 10 things that you might or might not have known about Spartan-IVs, but here's a bonus for you. Even June, you know, Spartan June from Noble Team, he went on to head the Spartan-IV branch, and the commander-in-chief of the Spartan branch in toto is Spartan Musa, a washed-out Spartan too. And even those two, even June specifically, to Musa, acknowledges that the Spartan-IVs on average are nowhere close to other Spartans. In fact, he said, and I quote, directly to Musa, "Most of them are alright, Musa. And they'll get better, but some of them are much better." Acknowledging in that sentence that they're okay, but they're not Spartans, but there are at least a few who truly are. And there we have it. That's the 10 things that you might or might not have known about Spartan-IVs. Let me know which ones you knew, which ones you didn't, and also let me know what you'd like me to cover next in this kind of series. I've noticed this is becoming exceedingly popular very quickly, so I'll keep doing them as long as you keep enjoying them. So let me know in the comments down below, and until next time. Thanks for watching. If I could respectfully ask, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Hit this video with a like if you enjoyed, and if not, it's not a problem. And be sure to pop a comment below to throw me an idea on what you want to see next. Massive thanks to my awesome patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Prophet, Leon, Sylphia, Mikhail and Irrefutable, the monitors of the array, Darian, Flaming Halo, Cameron, Spartan0137, the Cave Potato, Andrew, Shia, Dakota and Ghost, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who have supported the channel and helped keep the domain operational. Huge props and recognition to Todd Morrison, Spartan137, Wesley Stuckey and Jacob Kemp for jumping on as Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members. You guys are epic. Shout out to John for reasons. And if you want to help support the channel and score yourself tons of perks and merch, head over to Patreon or consider becoming a YouTube member. Links, as ever, are in the description. Much love, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.